Good morning, good morning. Welcome all. I'll start with a question, a quick show of hands. Uh, this was something which was asked yesterday. So for how many of you this is the first IGDC? Quick show of hands. Okay, so, okay, a lot of hands. Yesterday I was thinking about how many of IGDCs I've been to. I'll not share the number because, man, I feel old. But welcome everyone. Uh, another question, again, show of hands. How many of you here are game creators? So folks like programmers, artists, QA, sound designers. Show of hands. Okay, so half, a bit more than half of the room. And how many of you are people who bring the game to the players? So people like marketeers and business people. A little less. Great, that's excellent because uh, I like to. I'm someone who has done both. Creating games and then getting the games to players. And I like to think of myself as someone who enjoys doing both and understands that both are equally important. And this is what essentially this talk is about. As much as a recovering programmer, I like to get into Unity and Unreal when I have a good idea. I also now realize spending some time trying to prove or disprove if the idea is going to work in the market is very important. So if there's one thing I hope all of you can take from this talk is next time a brilliant idea strikes your mind, don't write a line of code. Or before you write a line of code or before you draw a single sprite, put some numbers on a spreadsheet and hopefully try to find out if the game will find its audience. That's what this is about. I'll talk about how I do some of these steps to be able to know what ideas we should work on in my journey at Lego Games, but also in my journey in game development. Quickly, Shagun has already gone through that, but 10 plus years in games, 12 years normally working. I've been an entrepreneur, game designer, product manager, programmer, built multiple games over the years, and currently I'm a product lead at Lego Games. I've been on product lead on games like Lego Tower, Lego Brawls, and Lego Brick Tales. And because I'm talking to you about how to find players for your games, I'll take a minute of your time to show the latest Lego game which I was part of. We use some of the things that I'll talk about later in the talk to define and refine what Lego Brick Tales would be. So it will be relevant, but this is Lego Brick Tales. Hopefully works. And now let me try and figure out how to get back to my slides. Just a second. Yes, on that happy note, some facts. A bit of context. I'll talk mostly from the context of a premium game for PC and consoles. But the steps that I'll talk about are equally valid for mobile free-to-play games. You just have to use different data sources. Having said that, only 10% of Steam developers, and this is a universe of 44,000 Steam developers, have made more than 100,000 in gross lifetime sales. It's a 10% doesn't look so bad, but if you put it in a different context, only 1 in 10. So if you look around you, 5 people on your left, 4 people on your right, only one of you would make 100,000 on Steam. And that's a scary thought. And my hope is that that doesn't happen for us. All of you make this and much more. And that's what this is about. This is about trying to kind of find places where we can all, make games which find the audience and, help you be successful. A little bit of diving deep into what that means. If you define those categories into 5 different aspects, you can see the full-timer and success story. So those are the 10% who really go and do well. So what do they do differently than everyone else? One thing which you'd see the full-timers and the success story as this talks about is they make a lot of games. And there is a good reason behind this. You have to obviously be in the industry for a long term to be able to do this. But there's also a point that I wanted to make here is that game development is a long journey. You have to sort of like agree or get to the fact that you have to make multiple games to hone your craft and do really well. So this is one thing which the best game developers do. They make a lot of games. They also are they also specialize. What this essentially is trying to say is that strategy and simulation, the genres, 50% of the success stories make games in strategy and simulation as compared to 36% in the learner. So the other thing which good game developers do is they make a lot of games, but they also specialize in specific genres. And to be able to do that, market research becomes very important. Now I'll take a bit of a pause here and sort of like double click on specialize. Specialize means going deep into specific genres or subgenres. What it helps you is, it helps you kind of hone your craft, know the players in that subgenres and really build something which talks to them in a nice manner. It also helps you kind of go from one genre to sort of like take the code base from one genre to another genre. A good example from Indian context is our friends from Sigma Games with their games Bonfire 1, Bonfire 2, and the new game which they are showcasing in the show floor, Metal Heaven. They have been able to kind of really specialize into it. I'll also double click on market research because I think it gets a lot of flack. It's a fancy word for just knowing what you want to build, or essentially trying to find out what do players want from your audience. As an example, from a non-game context, maybe it makes it easier for us to relate to market researches. If I'm building a competitor to Ola and Uber, the best place for me to kind of find out what I should build is to ask people who are already using Ola and Uber. So kind of keeping that same context in mind, market research is about kind of finding players who you think would be the players for your game, and going and trying to find them and ask them questions. But yeah, so what does this actually mean for me? What does this mean for you as you're trying to kind of find this next great idea which you think will be really successful for you? So I'll do it as a sort of like a case study. I'll take an example of, a hypothetical example of a game that I would like to build. And we have done this process for all the games that I've built over the years. But I'll take this a new example. If someone wants to steal it and build this game, feel free to do it. Probably put me in the credits somewhere. Like to be in credits of released games, that's great. But let's say you want to build a minimal city builder game. How do I start doing this, right? How do I start figuring out whether this is a good idea, whether I should do it or not, and how should I try to prove or disprove this idea? A few things here. Minimal city builder, I love city builder games, but I'm assuming I'm building this as a small indie team, so I cannot do everything, so I'll have to do something minimal. If I have to do something like this, I'll start with what I call a hero game, or essentially a core game. For me, it will be a game like Islanders. Going back to the idea of Ola, Uber, and trying to build a competitor to them, I think if I build a minimal city builder game, players who have played Islanders would probably also want to play my game. The good thing in games is people don't really select one game and play that, they want to play more games. So if someone likes Islanders, they'll probably want to also play my game. The other thing is, if people don't, someone has played Islanders and don't like Islanders, maybe I can build something which they will like. So, it's a win-win. People I know who have done something like this, they probably start with 2 or 3 games. I like to start with just one game. Now, I'll switch on to, once I have this, what I'll do. So I'll switch on to Steam page. So this is a Steam page. Well, obviously, as a starting point, I'll look at reviews, which is a good idea of, are people liking this game? Are they playing this game? Look at some of the tags, which will be useful going forward. But the first thing I'll do is I'll look at more like this, which is more games in this specific niche subgenre. What I'm trying to do at this point is build a not a portfolio, but build a list of games which I think are games, the audience of which would be the audience of my game. So I'm trying to kind of find these pockets of audiences who have played other games which I think they would also like my game. So I'll look at more like this. I'll probably go see all of the games which Steam thinks people like from of people who have been liking Islanders. So I'll look at all this. This will be a starting point. What I'll do next, from my perspective, is use this brilliant tool called Game Data Crunch. Love for everyone to check it out and support on Patreon if you can them. They really help you go deep into this market research phase. We're trying to find more of these games. So, and they'll give you how Islanders does for different kind of, like on OpenCritic, is it a critically acclaimed game or not? How it does on Colony Sim, which is another specific subcategory. And you can start going into these different categories. And as I mentioned, I'm doing a minimal city builder. So I'll try and get into this city builder tab and see if I can find more games like Islanders. So I guess that's this. As part of this talk, as you see, I've gone on to the 650th game, city builder game, looking for other games in this genre. And this is at a point where you have seen most of what city builder games are there. This is probably a few hours of your time, assuming you already know it. The reason of going this far deep is one thing which I've seen people do when they're doing exercise like this is they look at the top 3 games and they say, oh, because the top 3 games have done this, my game would do that. And that's not a great way to think about it because that has a survivor bias in there. So I would like you to go as deep as possible to get into like the 600th game. The last game I did for this talk was Tile Tale. I put it into a spreadsheet, which I'll talk about going forward. But because that sort of like seems to me as like the worst, not the worst case scenario, but as a realistic scenario if things don't work out really well. So quick switch back to my slides and order. Yes. So that's the starting point. More like this. Again, talked about game data crunch. Now the question which you might have is, Abhinav, there are already 20, 25 games which are like my game, so why should I bother building my game? I get that a lot. I think about that a lot. But this is the thing which I think really helps thinking about your game, and this is where the sort of like using data to think about game design and what you do from a design perspective comes into place. What you can do is you can then build a 2x2 grid like this. We use this a lot in our work. And the axes can be something that you define. For this game, what I've defined the axis is, one is self-expression, essentially customization. How would the game that I build allow a player to make the city their own city? So essentially, the city builder would allow them to make the city which is very different from someone else's city. So self-expression. So that's one axis. The other axis is systems. So essentially, how deep is the game from a city builder systems perspective? How many systems are there? How do you how do you how do you do things in the game which allow you to kind of go really deep into some of the systems which the game talks about? So what you could do as a next step is once you have these 25 games, and there's no data here, bit of subjectivity, but I love this part of an exercise where you can start putting all the games that you have put into those axes. As an example, Islanders, a bit of self-expression, not a lot, but also not a lot of systems. They do other things well, but on this axis, they are on this side. Something like Kingdoms and Castles, not as much self-expression, but a lot of systems. Townscaper, another game I love, a lot of self-expression. It's essentially a toy, so you can kind of build whatever you want, but not a lot of systems. By doing something like this, I can actually find spaces where I can build my game, which is a new take on this. So if I have to build this minimal city builder, I'll probably go as high as Townscaper in self-expression because I think that's an interesting avenue to explore. But I'll also put more systems in, so kind of trying to bring it to the middle of the grid, top middle of the grid. And maybe there are not as many games there, but I think that would be a space where there would be people who want to play that game, but also, it's a new space for me to explore. So that's where using data can really help you with game design because this will show you spaces which are still not unexplored, show you spaces which you can potentially go out and fill. Now to actual spreadsheets. Love this bit. So let me switch to the spreadsheet. So, no. Yes. This is a great tool. I'd love everyone to, the links in my talk, I'll make sure there are links to the video when it comes out so that you can check. But once you have the list of games, what do you do with them? What I have done for the games that I collected, 20 odd games, I've plugged them into, the resolution is a bit low on this, but I've plugged into this sheet. What it essentially does is it gets information from Steam using the Steam API in terms of how long the game has been out, what the game is about, how many reviews. It tries to predict on this side how much revenue on this number here, how much revenue this game potentially would have made. Now, this is something which is based on data collected from over the years. It's not a surefire way, so I cannot say Islanders has made that much amount of money, but it's a good starting point. At least directionally, you can get an idea of if it works or not. As an example, how you use something like this is now this is the place where things break because we are trying to do something real time. But you take the Steam ID from a game, deployment not an option. Maybe that's a good idea. Put it into this database. Let's see, fingers crossed. Game development. Great. So now, once you plug that in, it pulls information from Steam pages, and you can then put diplomacy not an option in one of your relevant games. It's here, and it shows up here. Let me just do a few things. Work in progress. But what that actually does is, and let me just switch to a view. It actually starts, if you look at on the right side, it puts those games into 4 quartiles and tries to give you what would happen if you make a game which is average of all those games. What would happen if you make a game which is sort of like the bottom quartile? So the bottom quartile here, the estimated raw revenue from Steam is $21,000. The second quartile, so if you make a game in the second quartile, you'd probably make $300,000. Great. If you make games which are in the third or the fourth quartile, then it's really good. But having a list of games like this, and I'll switch back to the market study data, and you can see I have Telltale also in there, which is a game which is not something which has made a lot of revenue. But having a broad cross-section of games that you put into something like this would allow you to really dig into what are the different cases that can come with a game. So if I'm looking at all this data, what I would do as next steps is use something like this, put some of the, along with the data, put things like what are the different games about, what are the conclusions, and try to build a realistic picture of if I make a game, if it falls in the bottom quartile, what would happen? If it falls in the top quartile, what would happen? And have plans for essentially have plans for making sure that all the scenarios, the bottom quartile to the top quartile, would still work for me. And if you do for different genres, and you find that the vast majority of the games, or the bottom quartile or the top or the bottom quartile, actually makes a lot less revenue in that genre, then I'll probably be a bit careful for this. But based on this, if I'm trying to think of this idea, minimal city builder, as I said, if someone wants to build it, feel free to steal the idea. It looks like a good idea. I think there are spaces, open spaces from a game design perspective for us to explore. And I think there is potential for us to make something which is maybe in the second quartile and makes a good amount of revenue. Now this is just Steam revenue, so I want to kind of go a little deeper based on some data into, okay, this is only Steam, but what happens if I make a game which I release on all platforms? So switch back to the slides. Yeah, this is just another data point, again, based on working years of collecting data. Year one sales to lifetime sales. This is something which the sheet I showed, they only do estimated sales for a game currently. They don't tell you if it's only 6 months old, how much potentially the lifetime sales of the game could be. So based on this and few other calculations I've kind of like put into my version of a sheet, where I can just put the Steam review number or the Steam ID into the Excel sheet, and it tells you how much potentially the lifetime revenue from Steam would be, based on some ratios. Again, not actual numbers, but directionally you'll get a chance. Again, as I was saying, this is the kind of place where you'd get with the Steam data. The next data point, as I say, is you'd want to know how much you can get from, if you release on all platforms, all premium console platforms, then how do you go? So the number from No More Robots, they've shared it publicly, of the ratio for their games is 4.5x. So if their game makes X on Steam, the overall revenue of that game across all platforms would be, with all platforms including Steam, will be 4.5x. Devolver in their reports have said 2.2. I would use something like 2.5s, and that's what I've used in my sheet to kind of like go from Steam revenue to revenue from across all platforms. This is something I wanted to show because it showed up yesterday when I was going through my feed. And The Long Dark, great game. They put out these numbers. Steam, they have 4 million players, and they have 10 million players overall. What's the ratio? 2.5. I wanted to put it because I think I'm awesome, but always good to validate your data with any data which you can get. So 2.5, great. So one final look at this data structure to be able to get you. But this comes to like the end of this, or towards the end of the talk. So what does all this mean, right? How do I use this to make something which or do the next steps? So what you can do with all this data, right? Apart from just knowing whether it's a good game to do or not, you can actually make a strategy out of all this data collection. You can actually try and predict, if it's a Steam launch, you can try and predict what the Steam launch wishlist number should be that you should have at the time of release. And you can start building a sort of like a market outreach around that number. What do I mean by that? Let's say, based on all this research, you say, before we go that, another bit of data, Steam launch wishlist number to week 1 sales, 0.1x, again, based on a lot of comparable games. ratio of week 1 sales to year 1 sales to 3x, all again, based on a lot of things that we have collected. But let's say you want 600,000 USD in lifetime revenue for your game. A great target to have. That would mean is that you'd want 240K in year 1 based on those ratios. You want 80K in week 1. You'd mean 32K week 1 from Steam. If it's a $20 price point, that means you'd want 4,000 units sold in week 1. And based on the ratio to Steam wishlist number, you'd want 40K Steam launch wishlist. So this actually gives you an idea of how much, from marketing perspective or market research perspective, or going out and talking about a game, what is the number you'd want realistically to aim for so that you can have your revenue targets. So real actionable numbers that you can say, till I get to 40K Steam launch wishlist numbers, I will not release the game come what may. And hopefully that's something which happens and you get more than that, but that's something which you can really hold on to for a calculation, with a calculation like this. That pretty much brings me to the end of my talk, but there's one bonus. This is another spreadsheet link to which will be there. This is by a fellow traveler and a publisher, and they've made this brilliant spreadsheet where you can put in your launch wishlist numbers, the number that we just talked about, which is 40,000. And they'll, based on different criteria, they'll actually tell you how much revenue you'd make. This is only Steam, but you can, now Steam to all platforms is 2.5x, so you can calculate just based on that. But based on different scenarios, they actually tell you how much revenue you can make across 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4th year. So yeah, that's all of what I wanted to talk about right now. As I said at the starting point, my hope is that before, all of us, we get great ideas, we get good ideas, and we get really excited about, trying to build that idea, bring that to life. But my hope is that, before you start doing that, you spend some time. This is probably, I don't know, few hours, or maybe at most a day or two of your work, but allowing you to look at the comparable games, allowing you to kind of put those numbers into perspective, I think gives you a better chance of building something which would work in the market, which the players would love. And I know that's what we all want as game developers, right? We want our games to be played by as many people as possible, and hopefully an exercise like this will help us do that. So that's me. Thank you. Questions? I see we have 3 minutes, so questions. And one quick note, QR code. Please check out, give reviews, 5 stars. That's what I want. Thank you.
So do we have any questions from this side for Abhinav? Yes, sir. Speak your name and into the mic.
Hello, I'm Vivek. Thank you for the talk. It was a lovely talk. I have just one question. In the slide that you showed, that you have self-expression and system graph, and you showed we can work towards the area where it's emptier and not a lot of game is made in that quadrant. But that can also mean that maybe that not a lot of games are made in that quadrant didn't work. They were made, but they didn't work. That's why there are not of game in that quadrant. And maybe we should work towards also that segment where a lot of games have been made and they have made a good revenue. So wouldn't be making games in that quadrant be more riskier than making games in a quadrant where a lot of games are successful?
Yeah, brilliant question. And there are 2 ways of looking at it. And when we do an exercise like this with the quadrants, we actually put in the size of each in terms of bubbles. So we get a sense of how big the game in each quadrant was. That's something which I have not done for this, but you definitely want to kind of put the relative size of all games in there. And that allows you to kind of see how big the different quadrants are. The other thing is, for this specific example, I actually looked a lot deeper than I would normally do for a game like this. And once you start looking deeper, you start finding places where things are working and things are not working. And there is a bit of subjectivity there, as I mentioned. There are reasons why things might not work, and the reasons might have nothing to do with the response of the player to the game itself. It might be factors like there's no game in a specific area, and because it's so adjacent to other games which have worked, it could work. So there is a bit of subjectivity. So I would, as a designer, I would try to build things which are in a slightly new space, and it is riskier, as you said, but my hope would be that risk would be tempered by the fact that I'm talking to players from day one and trying to kind of build something which is new but has enough of familiarity. So that's the other thing. Mark in his talk yesterday talked about talking to players. Great advice. Talk to your players all the time, so they'll guide you to find your space in that quadrant. Hope that answers the question. Yeah, there's a question here.
When we talk about the learning games space, or say games for school students, they are not exactly entertainment games, and these days one keeps seeing that even government and NCRT and institutions like these, they also come up with apps with which you can develop various learning and assessment games. So what kind of approach would you suggest if say someone wants to develop a game for students, or say higher education students?
Yes.
What would be the engagement metrics, or how would your approach change?
Yeah, a brilliant question. For games which are learning games or games for younger audiences, the best way to know what to build, as I was talking about, is ask your players. For something like Steam games, there's so much data. Players have already spoken through their wallets, so you can get the data. But for something like learning games, you probably don't have the data to collect from the market. So what I would do in that case is essentially write a bit of code, build something, or at least do prototype something and bring it in front of kids. One thing which I've learned working with kids is you don't want to test them directly. You don't want to ask them as the developer of the game, because they would want to please you and want to say nice things. So have a wall between you and have someone else test it. But that's what I would do. I would essentially build and show something, build something very short, so that you're not spending 6 months or 1 year. Build something in 2 months and bring it to the audience that you feel would work. And again, I would use something like people who are already playing similar games, people who are already playing games, not learning games, but games. We have our app Lego Duplo World. So people who are already playing Lego Duplo World, people who are already playing games like our other competitors, find a way to find the people or kids who are already playing those games and show your game and see, okay, how does this compare? How does this work? Is there something which that game does not do, which we could do, and things like that. Again, talking to, it feels like a bit of a cop-out saying, just talk to the players, but I mean, no one knows the answer. So, I think that's what I do.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, does it include the platform cost or publishing cost which we require, or is it just revenue alone?
This calculations is just revenue, but I mean the first set of calculations, but when you go deeper, you can have a percentage which is around 40%. So when you get like a gross number, the numbers that I showed were net numbers. So I've already deducted the 40% or deducted the 60%. So you'd want to work with net revenue numbers. So the 600,000 I mentioned was the net revenue number after platform cost and everything else.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
That
excellent.
answers.